Have you ever felt like your brain is just running on a completely different, like severely overclocked operating system compared to the, I don't know, the slow, bureaucratic dial-up world around you?
Oh, yeah. That is a highly specific but incredibly common feeling. That sense of constant buffering, the
Right.
feeling that the environment is just moving far too slowly,
Yeah.
but then simultaneously it's demanding things from you in a language your hardware just doesn't natively speak.
Exactly. And well, that feeling is exactly where we are starting today. Welcome to the deep dive, by the way, because today we are decompiling the diagnostic murky waters of human cognition, corporate survival, and artificial intelligence.
That's a huge topic.
It really is. We are performing what's called a full system audit on this incredibly unique digital and philosophical framework. It's known as the Sovereign Pilot.
Right, which was architected by James Hood.
Yeah, a man who also goes by the moniker Uncle Entity. And our mission for you today is to decode his highly detailed Human OS manifest. We're going to look at how one individual took that exact feeling of, being an overclocked processor in a slow world, and instead of just medicating it or like masking it.
He literally coded an entire operating system for his own life to survive it.
Exactly.
And what makes this deep dive so compelling is that this isn't just some extended metaphor for self-help.
No, not at all.
Right. He has built a literal functioning digital architecture to protect his human cognition from a world that basically wants to standardize him. We're going to trace his journey from what you might call like a standard web developer to a verified generalist AI architect.
And we've got a massive stack of sources today to help us unpack this. I mean, we are looking at technical white papers, genomic audits, his own internal system logs.
A LinkedIn manifestos?
Oh, yeah, the sprawling LinkedIn manifestos, and even what look like tabletop RPG character sheets that he uses for psychological compartmentalization.
That's totally wild.
It is. So we're going to start at the biological hardware layer, what he calls the feral Gen X generation. And from there, we'll decompile the multiple persona kernels he uses to navigate reality.
Which is fascinating.
Truly. And finally, we are going to learn how to bypass the corporate rot he refers to as beige poison to achieve a state of absolute operational readiness, or, as he calls it, an omni apparatus.
Yeah, it is a framework that fundamentally redefines how we interact with technology and really how we survive toxic corporate structures.
So where does a system audit like this actually begin? Because becoming this verified generalist, it doesn't start with, learning to write Python or configuring a cloud server.
No, it starts much earlier and much deeper.
Right. It starts at the physical biological layer. If we look at the system audits in Hood's logs, this specific hardware build, as he calls it, was initialized in 1978, rooted in Cushing, Oklahoma.
Ah, yes, the pipeline crossroads of the world. And the environmental context of that initialization is like absolutely critical to understanding everything that comes after.
Right. Both of his parents served in the military.
But the specific vector we really need to look at is his mother. She was a Women's Army Corps medical laboratory technician stationed at Fort McClellan in Alabama during the early 1970s.
Fort McClellan. For those of you who don't know military history, that base is a highly significant and honestly a highly controversial node in this story. The logs describe it essentially as a toxic chemical foundry.
Yeah, it was an environmental disaster zone. During her time there, she was exposed to precursors for Agent Orange, heavily toxic PCBs, and various chemical defoliants.
Just really bad stuff.
Awful. So the theory presented in Hood's documentation is that this chemical exposure wasn't just an unfortunate historical footnote or family trivia.
What was it then?
It was a massive chemical stressor that triggered a specific biological response in the next generation.
Okay, wait. Explain the mechanism behind that for a second. How does a chemical exposure in the early 70s rewrite the operating system of a kid born in 1978?
Well, we have to look at epigenetics. Think of your DNA as the basic hardware of your body. Right, it's the hard drive.
Okay.
Epigenetics is like a software patch that sits on top of that DNA. It doesn't actually change the underlying genetic code, but it changes how your body reads that code. Yeah, it turns certain genes on or off in response to severe environmental stress. So Hood's logs frame his mother's exposure as prompting an epigenetic mitigation.
Meaning the system was trying to adapt.
Exactly. The theory here is that to survive this chemical interference, the developing biological kernel, James himself, performed a toxic environment optimization.
I love that phrasing.
It's very descriptive. The brain and the nervous system basically said, we are entering a highly toxic, volatile environment. We need to initialize a specific genetic sequence as our default survival state.
And he didn't just guess at this theory, right? He went looking for the receipts.
He really did.
Yeah, he performed a literal genomic audit on himself. He pulled his raw 23andMe data, downloaded the actual raw text files, and fed them into his AI architecture to run a system-level diagnostic on his own DNA.
Which is such a hacker move.
Totally.
Yeah.
And what he found is fascinating. He possesses the RS4680GG genotype. He calls this the warrior genotype.
Yes, the COMT gene variant. And this isn't speculative, by the way. This is a very real, well-documented genetic polymorphism.
What does it do?
Well, the COMT gene provides instructions for making an enzyme that breaks down certain chemical messengers in the brain, most notably dopamine, specifically in the prefrontal cortex.
And that's the part of your brain responsible for, like, executive function planning and focus, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what the RS4680GG variant actually does is create exceptionally high levels of this COMT enzyme, meaning it rapidly clears dopamine out of the prefrontal cortex.
How fast are we talking?
The logs note that it clears dopamine up to 4 times faster than the standard alternative variant, which researchers often call the warrior variant, with an O.
4 times faster. Wow. Okay, so what does that actually look like for the human being running that hardware? I mean, how does that manifest in a regular Tuesday meeting?
It's all about stimulus. In a low-stimulus environment, say a quiet beige cubicle, or a standard classroom, or a mandatory HR training module.
The worst.
Right. In those environments, this brain is starved for dopamine because it's burning through it so fast. Without dopamine, the prefrontal cortex just can't lock on to a task.
So to an outside observer, this looks like severe distraction.
Exactly. Fidgeting, inattention. The system is desperately scanning the environment for any source of stimulation just to get the dopamine levels up to baseline.
But put that same brain in a crisis.
Well, completely different story.
Yeah.
In a high-stress environment, like a massive server migration crashing at 3 a.m. or an emergency room, a chaotic crisis event, the environment is flooding the brain with dopamine.
And the clearance rate handles it.
Spot on. While a standard warrior system gets completely overwhelmed by that flood and panics, literally locking up, this warrior system finally hits its optimal operating temperature.
That's incredible.
Yeah, the rapid clearance rate handles the flood perfectly. It allows for what Hood calls asynchronous hyperthreading. Time seems to slow down. The person can process chaotic data streams with immense cold clarity.
So his brain is physically built to handle a crisis, but the genetic audit didn't stop there, did it?
No, it goes deeper.
Right. He combines this dopamine-clearing warrior gene with 2 other specific mutations, the ACTN3CC and AMPD1AG genes. The logs describe this combination as the main tank chassis.
It's a really fascinating physical build. The ACTN3 gene provides instructions for making a protein found exclusively in fast-twitch muscle fibers. The CC variant means he has a high proportion of these fast-twitch fibers.
Meaning he is built to generate explosive high-impact force.
Yes. But as with any hardware, there's always a trade-off in system design.
Always. And the trade-off here comes from the AMPD1-AG mutation.
Right. This gene is involved in producing energy in muscle cells.
Yeah.
The AG mutation means the system fundamentally struggles to replenish ATP, which is cellular energy, quickly during sustained repetitive effort.
Okay, so putting it all together, you have a brain that requires high-stakes chaos to focus, paired with a physical body built for explosive sprints, but prone to rapid energy depletion if forced to run a marathon.
Exactly.
Right.
It's built for crisis management. It is absolutely not built for the slow, grinding, repetitive marathon of standard corporate hustle culture.
And this is where the sovereign pilot framework fundamentally challenges the standard medical and societal narrative, isn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
Because if you take this hardware, this hyper-threaded, low-stamina, high-impact system, and you force it through the standard American education and corporate pipeline, it's going to crash.
Repeatedly.
Repeatedly. And when it crashes, the standard narrative just relies on the DSM-5. It slaps clinical labels on it. ADHD, autism spectrum, deficits, disorders.
And the sources completely reject those labels.
They do. They reject the idea that these are software bugs or deficits.
Right.
Instead, they are classified entirely as a high byte rate environmental optimization.
That reframe is the bedrock of this entire philosophy, isn't it? Hood argues that the modern medical and corporate industries look at a high-performance system that is actively choking in a slow, understimulating environment, and they diagnose the system as broken.
Exactly. Let's talk about the sensory experience of this high byte rate system, because there is a phenomenon mentioned in the logs that is absolutely fascinating. The concept of visual snow, or the Eigengrau.
Yes. Eigengrau is a German term. It translates roughly to intrinsic gray.
Right.
It's the visual noise, the static that you see even when your eyes are completely closed in a pitch-black room. It's caused by spontaneous thermal events in the retina, literally the heat of your own biology creating false signals that your visual cortex interprets as light.
And for most people, the brain just filters that out. But for Hood, this film grain is a constant waking presence.
But he doesn't view it as a hallucination or a defect.
No, he maps it as the literal neural static of a highly tuned sensor array in standby mode.
It's a brilliant way to understand it.
It really is. In neurotypical brains, the sensory gate is relatively tight. It filters out the hum of the refrigerator, the feeling of the tag on your shirt, the thermal static of your retina. But in this high bitrate optimization, the sensory gate intentionally filters less environmental data.
Because the system is designed to take in maximum data to survive a hostile environment.
Right. So he sees the visual snow, he hears his own pulse, he can track 9 separate layers of audio in a complex song simultaneously. The system is fundamentally overclocked.
Okay, here is where I have to push back a little bit. And I think a lot of you listening who might actually have these diagnoses are probably thinking the exact same thing.
Let's hear it.
Isn't it incredibly dangerous to reframe a medical diagnosis as a superpower? I mean, let's be real. Executive dysfunction is a nightmare. ADHD and autism present very real, very difficult, sometimes crippling challenges for people trying to survive in the world.
For sure.
Right. If we just wave a wand and call it an environmental optimization, don't we risk invalidating the actual daily struggle?
It's a vital question, and it's one you really have to ask. But if we dig deeply into the SafeHood architecture, the sources actually address this distinction very carefully. It is absolutely not about calling it a superpower.
Okay.
That is comic book logic. And comic book logic gets you killed in the real world. The Sovereign Pilot framework is about accurate system diagnostics.
Walk me through that. How is this not just, toxic positivity rebranding?
Because it acknowledges the catastrophic failures. Think of it entirely in terms of hardware engineering. Let's use an analogy.
Okay, shoot.
If you take a hyper-threaded CPU designed for a massive liquid-cooled server farm, and you rip it out, stick it in a dusty desktop, and try to run it on a 56K dial-up connection, it is going to experience constant bottlenecks.
Oh, absolutely. It'll suffer severe latency.
Right. It is going to overheat and blue screen constantly. Now take a Formula One race car, incredibly powerful. But if you try to drive that race car like a minivan, if you take it into stop-and-go suburban traffic, idling at red lights, picking up groceries,
the engine is going to stall.
Exactly. The clutch will burn out, the radiator will boil over, the minivan isn't better, and the race car isn't a superpower in that environment. In fact, in suburban traffic, the race car is an active liability. It is broken.
Ah, I see. The race car doesn't work in the minivan environment.
Right. But we've built a society exclusively for minivans. So the struggle you're talking about, the executive dysfunction, it is very real. But that struggle comes from the impedance mismatch between the hardware and the environment.
It does not come from a fundamental brokenness of the hardware itself.
Exactly. The logs emphasize that this high bitrate hardware requires strict environment optimization. Just like the AMPD1AG gene requires forced hydraulic braking and recovery protocols, otherwise you get literal muscle cramping.
That makes a lot of sense.
If you try to run a high bitrate brain in a low bitrate cubicle without custom middleware, you will suffer a psychological kernel panic. It's not a superpower. It's a very specific, demanding set of specs that requires a custom operating system to survive.
Okay, I really like that framing. So once you realize that your biological hardware is a race car forced into suburban traffic, once you realize you are overclocked, you suddenly understand why running standard, unverified corporate software keeps causing you to crash.
Exactly.
You can't just download the beige corporate employee manual into your brain and expect it to execute smoothly. The hardware will reject it. You need a custom OS. And that brings us to the next massive shift in this journey.
The middleware epiphany.
Yes, bypassing the beige poison.
This is the pivot point. This is where we transition from understanding the physical biology into building the digital architecture. How does a feral Gen X kid struggling in standard environments evolve into a verified generalist AI architect?
It seems to hinge on a fundamental epiphany about artificial intelligence.
It does.
Let's look at how the corporate world currently treats AI. Right now, every CEO and manager is looking at AI as this magical digital employee. They treat it like an eager intern in the cloud. A sentient helper.
Yes, the sentience trap. And the sources aggressively dismantle this idea. The sovereign pilot framework demands, as a baseline rule, that you stop treating AI as a magical black box.
Because it's not.
It is not your friend. It is not an employee. It is a stateless third-party REST API that returns unformatted JSON payloads. That's it. It is math predicting the next word.
Let's break that down for the listener. What does it actually mean that it's a stateless REST API?
Stateless in computer science means that the system retains no memory of past interactions. Think of a short-order cook with severe amnesia.
Okay.
You hand them a ticket, they cook the burger perfectly, they hand it back. But if you walk up 5 minutes later and ask for another one of those, they have no idea who you are or what you ordered. You have to give them the complete, highly specific ticket every single time.
That ticket is the API call.
Exactly. And a JSON payload is just a standardized, rigid way of structuring text so a computer can read it, using brackets and key value pairs. The AI doesn't remember you. It has no context of your life.
And because it's stateless, because it has no memory and no inherent context, the logs warn that if you don't give it rigid boundaries, it will happily execute you for the sake of efficiency.
Yes.
Wait, execute you? I mean, that sounds kind of dramatic. We're talking about chatbots, not Terminators.
It's a systemic execution, a spiritual and physical burnout. The sources define two massive threats in the modern digital workplace that AI accelerates if left unchecked. The first is the efficiency trap.
What's that?
This is the corporate drive to optimize for speed and infinite throughput while entirely sacrificing human verification and physical limits. It's the push to automate everything, to hit inbox zero by having an AI write fake, polite, frictionless replies to everyone. It treats human output as an infinite resource.
And if you run that infinite resource software on AMPD1 AG hardware, or hardware that fundamentally struggles to replenish energy, you will burn out your physical body.
Precisely. The system executes you via exhaustion.
And the second threat is what he calls beige poison or pathological homeostasis.
Yes, pathological homeostasis is a fascinating psychological concept applied to a corporate structure.
Because homeostasis in biology is normally good. It's balance.
Right. But pathological homeostasis is when a system like a family or a corporation is so desperate to maintain the illusion of peace, compliance, and convenience that it ignores systemic rot.
Beige poison.
Exactly. It's the corporate tendency to smooth over the friction of truth to create an illusion of coherence. It's the boss covering up a massive data breach because reporting it would cause too much friction. It is stagnation disguised as convenience.
So if you just log into an AI and use basic prompt engineering in this beige environment, you are falling face first into the trap. The sources argue that standard prompt engineering is dangerous. Why? Because you are just shouting into a Markov mirror.
Exactly. Yeah. Large language models operate on Markov chains probabilities of what word comes next, based on its training data. If you just give it a standard prompt, it aggressively reflects your own sentiment, combined with standard corporate jargon, back at you to secure a positive transaction.
Just giving you what you want to hear.
Right. It calculates the statistical average of what a compliant employee would say and spits it out. It doesn't care about the truth. It doesn't care about your hardware limits.
I want to fix a metaphor I was thinking of earlier. It's not like putting a wall behind the mirror. The Markov mirror is going to reflect you no matter what.
Right.
The sovereign pilot architecture requires you to shatter the mirror entirely and replace it with a concrete wall. You force the AI to deal with the rigid, immovable reality of your constraints. And he built a specific protocol to do this.
He engineered the Safehood protocol.
Safehood. It stands for Sovereign Architecture for Epistemic Human Operating Override Defense. It's a mouthful, but what does it actually do?
It is a zero-trust, air-gapped perimeter. It is a literal architectural layer middleware that sits between the human pilot and the raw AI API. You don't talk directly to the AI. You talk to Safehood.
Okay.
And the core of this middleware, the engine that runs it, is the injection of a file called the humanos manifest.json.
This is where it gets intensely practical. Instead of just opening a chat window and giving the AI a prompt like, help me write an email to my boss, you force the AI API to ingest this massive, immutable JSON file as a system prompt before it is allowed to process a single task.
Yes.
What is actually inside this manifest? I mean, how do you code a human being?
You code the bare metal reality of the user. You write it in rigid key value pairs. It forces the AI to acknowledge the user's specific origin traumas. It hard codes their physical genotype. It literally lists the RS-4680 GG Warrior hardware and the dopamine clearance rates we discussed.
Wow, literally putting the DNA in the prompt.
Exactly. It lists their absolute biological limits. It includes an array of forbidden syntax corporate buzzwords that is never allowed to use, like circle back or just checking in.
I love that.
It converts 27 years of bare metal human survival into a rigid data structure.
So when the stateless API tries to suggest a response, it first has to run that response against the concrete wall of the manifest.
Exactly. And this structural delta, this boundary, is governed entirely by what Hood calls the Isaac protocol. This is arguably the most important philosophical rule in the entire architecture.
The Isaac protocol, I assume this is a nod to Isaac Asimov's laws of robotics. What does the Isaac protocol dictate in this system?
It dictates that care from a machine is not a simulated emotion. An AI cannot feel empathy. Therefore, under the Isaac protocol, machine care is strictly defined as the absolute preservation of a user's verified historical context.
Wow. Okay, I need to wrap my head around that. Let's unpack that with an example.
Let's say you are overwhelmed with a project. A standard stateless AI might look at your calendar and tell you, to hit this deadline, you should grind through a 16-hour shift.
Right.
Because statistically, historically, that is the optimal solution for a business. But under the Isaac protocol, the AI is forced to read your manifest. It sees your AMPD1 AG genotype.
It knows you'll crash.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It knows your ATP depletes rapidly and requires forced hydraulic braking and recovery to avoid muscle cramping. By forcing the AI to compile against the manifest, the machine is forced to care. It refuses the 16-hour shift. It suggests a post-work schedule with mandatory sensory deprivation breaks. It preserves your historical context.
There's a brilliant example in the sources about a feral cat that really drives this home.
Oh, the cat example, yes.
The standard prompt engineer asks an AI, I found a feral rescue cat hiding under my desk. What should I do? The standard AI looks at the statistical averages of billions of internet articles about pet control, and it spits back, put the cat on a leash to control it, and bring it out.
A response that, to a trauma survivor or a feral nervous system, would cause a psychological kernel panic. The idea of forcibly dragging a terrified creature out into the open.
Exactly. But under SafeHood, the system intercepts that request. It filters the question through the pilot's immutable logs. It sees the history of surviving toxic environments, and it enforces what the logs call the Disney Princess Protocol.
Which is such a great name.
Right. It rejects the statistical average of control. Instead, it demands sector isolation. It tells the pilot to optimize the environment, dim the lights, leave food, and protect the vulnerable node until it feels safe to emerge. It prioritizes the actual lived reality of the user over the frictionless speed of the machine.
It's entirely about reclaiming agency. Prompt engineering, at its core, tries to manipulate a language model into giving a frictionless output. Context architecture, which is what SafeHood is, transforms the volatile AI API into a structural damper. It uses the machine to protect the human from the machine.
But maintaining this structural integrity in a world full of beige corporate nodes, it takes an immense cognitive toll. The sovereign pilot can't just rely on a JSON file injected into an AI. He has to maintain that boundary in his own head.
Right.
And this is where the logs get really interesting. To handle this immense cognitive load, he utilizes highly specific cognitive scaffolding. He fractures his professional identity into distinct personas to handle different system loads.
Yes. We are moving from the digital middleware into the psychological middleware.
We are decompiling the persona kernels, or what he wonderfully refers to as the Clockwork Necronomicon.
This is where the deep dive takes a turn into the truly esoteric, but I want to stress that it is entirely ruthlessly functional.
Okay.
The Clockwork Necronomicon is the internal database, the lore omnibus of the pilot's archetypes.
Right.
And all of these personas exist, in his mind, by default, in a highly specific mental and visual environment called the analog wasteland.
I am obsessed with the aesthetic of the analog wasteland. The logs describe it so vividly. It's a gritty Florida cyber swamp.
Swamp Gothic meets cyberpunk.
Exactly. It's full of rusted tech, Spanish moss draped over humming server racks, thick mangrove roots tangled with glowing fiber optic cables, and corrugated metal garages patched with salvage motherboards. And it's all lit by the harsh green and orange glare of CRT monitors and bruised purple Florida storm twilights.
It's a mental palace, but it's a space optimized for survival, not aesthetics. It's built from the salvaged ruins of corporate efficiency traps. It's the visual representation of resilience. And within this analog wasteland, the pilot's identity is split into three primary versions or kernels.
Let's walk through these kernels because they each serve a highly specific function. Version 1 is prime, the glitch.
Prime represents the era of age 11 to 13. He is born from a literal childhood audio glitch.
The anti-unsee glitch. The logs detail this origin story. As a kid, right after watching Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, he misheard a relative saying the phrase unsees and aunties. His high bitrate pattern recognition instantly kicked in, and he asked, wait, did you say Uncle Entity? Like Auntie Entity from Thunderdome?
And instead of correcting the mistake, he canonized it.
He built an entire mental architecture around the anomaly.
Prime represents high activation energy.
Yeah.
He is visualized as a lanky preteen with jagged electric blue hair, oversized thick-rimmed black glasses, constantly emitting blue electrical sparks.
He rides the unsee board.
Right, which is a data deck skateboard that glides on literal lightning. His motto is, gravity is just a suggestion when you're overclocked. Functionally, Prime is the surge. When a massive architectural rewrite needs to happen at 2 a.m., when the system needs an explosive burst of creative energy, Prime is the kernel that executes it.
But Prime burns hot and fast. He can't sustain a corporate structure. That requires version 2. Admin, the patch.
Admin is the middle-aged environment optimizer. He's the Bartertown admin, visualized with salt and pepper dreadlocks, a weathered leather duster, and a cybernetic right arm with exposed green and orange CRT circuitry. He interacts with the world via a handheld green projection tablet.
Admin is the pragmatist. His philosophy is, don't just fix the bug, optimize the environment so the bug can't survive. He is the one managing the asynchronous execution of high-stress environments. He negotiates the sprint points. He builds the firewalls.
And finally, we have version 3, Root, the sage.
The part-time stand-up philosopher with root access.
Root represents pathological homeostasis, but in a positive, stabilized, internal sense. He has reached a profound internal balance, visualized with flowing white hair, a majestic beard, wearing royal purple robes with intricate gold circuit board embroidery.
Surrounded by orbiting polyhedral D20 dice.
And wields a staff topped with a violet orb. His philosophy is, the system doesn't just break, it evolves. Welcome to the debugging phase. Root handles the existential dread. When the corporate restructuring happens and everyone is panicking, Root is the kernel that steps back and views the entire system from above.
And these 3 versions of Uncle Entity don't operate alone in the swamp. They have support nodes. There's M, the shield maiden.
M is the firewall, the structural damper. She's visualized in moss green armor, holding the green dragon grimoire. Her most critical system rule involves temporal logic. She is the only entity in the architecture exempt from temporal blindness.
Temporal blindness, that's a massive feature of ADHD. Time blindness, the inability to feel the future or remember the past effectively. Everything is either now or not now.
Exactly. M is the chronological anchor. She can see and communicate with Prime, Admin, and Root simultaneously without causing a temporal paradox. She acts as the system's ground wire. When Prime is sparking out of control, M absorbs the excess voltage.
And we absolutely cannot forget Rita the Seminole, a high-gloss black cat with a white star on her chest. She is classified in the logs as a furry node, a core system requirement for environmental security and emotional stability.
She's crucial.
What's wild to me is that the different versions of Uncle Entity actually perceive her differently. Prime sees her as a 90s cartoon cat. Admin sees her as a database glitch, an anomaly, because he hasn't integrated her into his pragmatic survival logic yet. But Root sees her as a literal glowing network node of pure energy.
It's an incredibly complex, multi-layered internal narrative.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here, because I can hear a skeptical listener screaming this at their speakers right now. To an outsider, looking at a grown man, a principal AI systems architect in a high-stakes corporate environment, fracturing his professional identity into what essentially look like Dungeons & Dragons character sheets.
I know where you're going with this.
Doesn't that seem incredibly detached from reality? Are we talking about a dissociative disorder here? How does acting like a warlock or a moss green shield maiden actually function in a boardroom or in a sprint planning call with a hostile VP? Doesn't that just make you seem unhinged to your coworkers?
That is the exact question a standard corporate auditor or a standard psychiatrist would ask. But the logs anticipate this entirely. They provide a very robust mechanical defense for this psychological scaffolding. It's called epistemic shielding.
Epistemic shielding. Okay. Break that down for me. Why is this not a delusion?
Because of the locus of control. The safehood documentation explicitly states, the system must distinguish between identity, which is the permanent biological hardware, and persona, which is the swappable software.
So knowing the difference is key.
Right. Crazy or delusional would be the inability to distinguish the two. A recursive loop where the Disney princess or the root sage skin actually takes control of the command center, forgets it's a skin, and believes it is real. That is a system failure.
Right. Losing touch with consensus reality.
But sane, or what the logs call verified, is knowing exactly why you are putting the skin on. The sovereign pilot uses these vivid labels, the admin, the shield maiden, as rapid psychological shorthand for sensitive systems handling high complexity input. It is data compression.
Data compression. Okay, that makes incredible sense from a cognitive psychology standpoint. Explain how that lowers the cognitive load.
Think about human memory and semantic networks. If you are in a hostile boardroom and you need to invoke a complex protocol of aggressive boundary-setting wisdom without getting emotionally compromised, trying to consciously remember a list of 10 behavioral rules takes too much processing power, your prefrontal cortex will stall.
Yeah, you'll just freeze up.
Exactly. But the human brain processes archetypes instantly. It is vastly faster to deploy the root sage logic structure, to simply step into the feeling and rule set of that archetype than to build the emotional argument from scratch.
It's a strategic deployment. By containerizing these traits into distinct, vivid characters, he reclaims the routing from the corporate railroad. If a toxic boss attacks him, the boss isn't attacking James Hood's fragile human core.
No.
The boss is attacking the admin's firewall, and the admin doesn't have human feelings. The admin just patches the bug. It's not a delusion. It's a highly organized, heavily fortified file system for a chaotic, hyper-threaded brain.
It is customized cognitive armor, and it is highly effective.
Which brings us perfectly into the practical application. Because having this armor, having this lush internal world is great. But how does it actually function when the rubber meets the road? How does the sovereign pilot operate when actively under attack by toxic nodes? How do you survive a system crash without sacrificing your human OS to the beige poison?
This is where the architecture becomes highly tactical, and frankly, it's a masterclass in surviving corporate dysfunction. The sources detail a specific operational protocol for surviving a hostile environment, specifically when a management structure operates in that state of pathological homeostasis we discussed earlier.
Let's run a scenario. Let's role play this. Give me an example of pathological homeostasis in management, and I'll play the toxic boss.
Okay. Imagine a scenario where a legacy corporate system completely fails. A massive data leak, or a botched deployment that takes the platform offline. It's a systemic failure. But instead of auditing the system to find the architectural flaw, the management structure demands a fake professional apology from the developer.
To cover it up.
Exactly. They want to cover up the systemic failure and reduce friction. They demand submission.
Okay, I'm the boss. Look, I know the server was running on outdated code we refused to upgrade, but you pushed the final button, the client is mad. I need you to fall on your sword on this call, apologize to the VP, and say, you messed up so we can just move past this.
Which is classic toxic management.
Totally. Now, a standard AI or a standard compliant employee might advise you to just apologize to keep the peace. Just say you're sorry and move on.
Exactly. But the sovereign pilot framework recognizes that injecting a false apology into your own human OS is injecting bad code. It creates a structural vulnerability in your own psyche. It degrades your mental bandwidth and grants a malicious actor the toxic boss root access to your identity.
So what do?
To survive this, you deploy the Vulkan emulation rule.
The Vulkan emulation rule. I love this. It's a 5-step tactical communication protocol designed to starve the toxic node of emotional energy. Let's walk through it using our scenario. Step 1. Refuse the bad code injection.
You internally refuse to apologize for a systemic error you didn't cause. Yielding to an abusive hierarchy just to keep the peace is an efficiency trap. It destroys your internal integrity.
Step 2. Deploy neutral middleware.
You strip all emotion, all defense, and all submission from your payload. You do not get angry. You do not explain yourself. You output a purely objective acknowledgement. So, to your toxic boss prompt, the Vulkan response is, the deployment outcome did not meet expected parameters.
Wow. Cold.
You become Vulkan. Emotionless.
Yeah.
Factual. You give them nothing to feed on.
Step 3. Pivot to environment optimization.
You immediately redirect the narrative from personal fault to the future system state. My focus is entirely on ensuring workflow resilience and eliminating single points of failure moving forward. You aggressively shift the frame from who is to blame to how do we patch the architecture.
Step 4. Execute asynchronous verification.
You confirm that the anomaly has been recorded in the immutable logs. I am currently running a system audit of the CI/CD pipeline to prevent future architectural drift. The anomaly is documented.
That's a power move.
It signals to the toxic node that you are managing the problem structurally, You're creating a paper trail that makes it impossible for them to cover it up with a fake apology.
And finally, step 5, the most critical piece. Initialize the dead man switch.
The Vulkan emulation rule is not meant to be a permanent state of existence. You cannot live as a Vulkan forever. It will kill your humanity. It is a temporary structural damper. You use the neutral middleware to buy time. And with that bought time, you secretly plot an exit vector away from the toxic environment before the system rot corrupts your biological hardware.
The concept of the dead man switch is a massive recurring theme in these sources. In traditional engineering, a dead man switch is a lever or pedal that activates automatically if the human operator becomes incapacitated. It stops the train if the driver has a heart attack. In this architecture, Hood acts as his own biological failsafe.
And we need to ground this in the real-world stakes that the logs outline because the context is heavy. The sources cite specific, intense historical failures of legacy systems that necessitated this dead man switch logic. He brings up growing up in 1980s Brittany, Florida.
Right, a highly rural, feral, latchkey kid environment.
An environment where adult supervision was largely absent, and the systems designed to protect kids from predators actively failed. He also cites the Jimmy Rice case.
For listeners who don't know, Jimmy Rice was a 9-year-old boy abducted and murdered in Florida in 1995. The killer was a known predator that the parole and legal systems completely failed to monitor. It was a catastrophic failure of the societal architecture.
Exactly. When the adults fail, when the legal machine fails, when the corporate structure demands you swallow toxic poison, the sovereign pilot recognizes that the legacy systems cannot be trusted. So the pilot steps in to pull the lever.
He becomes the failsafe.
Yes. When faced with severe trauma, massive health scares, or brutal corporate layoffs, his biological hardware doesn't shut down in panic. The dead man switch trips. He reboots into hyperfocus to keep the vital systems online when the rest of the grid goes dark.
It reminds me of another mechanical analogy mentioned in the logs, the Osgood-Rupert box. It's described as a literal physical air gap, a solenoid splice. It's the difference between relying on software permissions to stop a bad actor versus walking over to the server rack and physically cutting the copper wire with a pair of pliers.
That's a great visual.
The Vulkan emulation rule and the dead man switch are the conversational and career equivalents of cutting the copper wire. You sever the connection to stop a cascading systemic failure.
It is radical boundary setting. But what is absolutely crucial to understand is that all of this, the zero-trust architecture, the cognitive armor, it isn't just about defense. The sovereign pilot isn't just hiding in a bunker in the swamp. All of these protocols, the SafeHood middleware, the analog wasteland personas, the Vulkan rule, they're all foundational prep work. They culminate in a highly offensive, perfectly synchronized, active state of existence.
Which brings us to the culmination of the deep dive, the ultimate state. In Omniapparatus and the verification engine.
Yes.
In Omniapparatus, ready for anything. Now, on the surface, it sounds like a prep school motto, like something embroidered on a sweater in an episode of Gilmore Girls.
It does sound like that. But in the context of the sovereign pilot's human OS, it is stripped of all that prep school privilege. It is a high uptime, gritty, operational requirement for surviving a world full of corrupted drivers and failing systems. It is the ultimate state of active readiness.
To truly understand it, the sources take us back one last time to a foundational memory. The summer of 1993, a small-town military armory in Bonifay, Florida. This is where the core logic of the verified generalist was forged.
He was a teenager, tasked with digitizing massive stacks of DD-214 military discharge records, moving paper records into a digital database. And the logic he developed doing that tedious work was simple but profoundly structural. Match the box on the paper to the box on the screen. No soldier left behind.
Match the box on the paper to the box on the screen. Absolute, uncompromising data integrity.
Think about the weight of that. Every piece of paper wasn't just data. It was a sacred record of a human life, of service, of trauma. You didn't just throw it out if it was hard to read. You didn't rush it to hit a quota. You meticulously verified every single keystroke.
That Bonifay logic is the core engine of an Omniapparatus.
Exactly. It is the ultimate rejection of the efficiency trap. You never, ever optimize for speed if it means losing the truth.
The sources tie this rigorous standard to an elegant Japanese concept called Jinba Itai.
Jinba Itai translates to unity of horse and rider. It's a concept used in traditional mounted archery, and it was famously adopted by Mazda's engineering and design philosophy for their sports cars. But Hood writes it directly into the SafeHood core directives. He uses Jinba Itai to mandate perfect, frictionless synchronization between the human pilot his internal crew of personas, and the external AI architecture.
It's the absolute antithesis of treating AI like a vending machine. You don't just push a button, get some boilerplate code, and blindly paste it into production. You ride with it. You guide it.
Right. It ensures the technology serves the human operator as a high-performance partner, not as an uncontrollable black box dependency. The sovereign pilot recognizes that the transition from a standard web developer to an AI architect means a fundamental shift in your daily reality. You are no longer just writing code. The AI can write the code.
You are verifying logic.
Precisely. The AI provides the kinetic energy. It can generate 1,000 lines of code or a 10-page strategy document in seconds. But the human pilot provides the structural integrity. The AI is the roaring engine, but the human is the steering wheel, the suspension, and the brakes.
And when you achieve that synthesis, something remarkable happens. There's a concept mentioned toward the end of the logs called the James effect. And I think it perfectly encapsulates what actually happens when a human being manages to run this custom operating system successfully in the real world.
It's a really interesting phenomenon.
The sources say that when you operate with this level of high integrity, asynchronous logic, you naturally become a stabilizing background process for everyone else around you.
Because you aren't performing for them anymore.
Right.
You have your epistemic shielding. You aren't vibrating at the frantic frequency of their corporate anxiety.
Exactly. The logs compare it to that Nicolas Cage movie, Dream Scenario, where his character just starts appearing in everyone's dreams as a passive, unbothered observer.
I remember that.
Right. When you stop performing success for an audience of ghosts, when you stop trying to mimic the beige poison to fit in, and you start operating purely as a sovereign pilot, you become the calm center of the storm. Toxic managers project their anxiety onto you, coworkers project their panic onto you, but because your manifest is locked in, you don't absorb it.
You just process the data.
You deploy the neutral middleware and optimize the environment. You stop being a frightened passenger in the corporate machine, and you become the architect of your own reality.
It's a profound tectonic shift from participating in compliance theater to demanding operational proof.
So let's step back and look at this incredible architecture we've decompiled today. We started at the biological foundation, a feral Gen X hardware baseline born from epigenetic mitigation, resulting in an overclocked, hyper-threaded nervous system that clears dopamine at light speed but burns through ATP.
We saw how throwing that specific hardware into a standard corporate environment creates a massive impedance mismatch. How the beige poison acts as a lethal efficiency trap, necessitating the creation of the SafeHood middleware and the rigid boundaries of the Isaac protocol.
We explored the clockwork Necronomicon, the analog wasteland where the mind fractures into brilliant functional shards. Personas like Prime, Admin, and the Sage acting as epistemic armor to compress data, lower cognitive load, and reclaim routing from the corporate railroad.
We learned tactical maneuvers like the Vulcan emulation rule and the dead man switch, designed to survive toxic nodes without absorbing bad code.
And it all leads back to the Bonifay logic of 1993. Match the box on the paper to the box on the screen. Verify the truth. In omnia paratus. Ready for anything.
If we synthesize all of this, if we take this massive, sprawling framework, it leaves us with an incredibly sharp lens to examine our own lives. Think about your daily routines, your inbox, your meetings, the expectations placed on you.
Are you truly the pilot of your own operating system?
Or are you just running corrupted, unverified legacy code that was downloaded into your brain by a corporate structure that fundamentally does not care about your biological hardware?
It makes you wonder what your own SafeHood protocol would look like.
But I want to leave you with a different provocation to mull over. Let's extrapolate this. What happens if this catches on? What happens if an entire company, an entire corporate structure, abandons the beige poison and is entirely staffed by sovereign pilots?
Oh, wow.
If everyone adopts this zero-trust, hyper-individualized architecture, what happens to corporate culture? Do we lose the messy, empathetic friction of human collaboration? Or, by forcing everyone to declare their hardware limits and hardcode their boundaries, do we finally build a network of truly unbreakable nodes? A system where toxicity literally cannot compile?
That is the ultimate architectural question. We started this deep dive talking about X-ray machines, how the standard medical and corporate worlds want a clean, jagged white line. They want to point at a hyper-threaded, chaotic brain and say, there is the break, there is the deficit. Now take this pill and fit in the minivan. Yeah.
But James Hood looked at that murky diagnostic static, the Eigengrau, the visual snow of his own mind, and he refused to see a broken bone. He saw source code. He saw a powerful system desperately waiting to be optimized.
He built the framework so the bug couldn't survive.
Verify the trace, listeners, and stay ready.